Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
The Cincinnati Bengals begin the 2024 NFL season with a disaster performance in a loss to the New England Patriots. Also, the Lions prevent Matthew Stafford from getting his revenge yet again, and the Steelers defense made a statement with their first win. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
If you were in an NFL survivor pool, no, you're not anymore, probably, because you probably had the Cincinnati Bengals in week 1 against the New England Patriots, the biggest favorites of the week, and they go down 16-10 at home to Jacoby Brissett and the new look New England Patriots. Jake Lisco from Locked On Bengals with me now. And Jake, this is hard to square given the expectations that we had of the Cincinnati Bengals coming into the season and the New England Patriots coming into the season. How did this happen?
Turnovers, inability to move the ball early, tackling, the normal culprits for games that get away from teams, things that you often point to in times like these are things that we're pointing to now. And then there's a little bit of concern that Joe Burrow couldn't or didn't push the ball downfield. Maybe that's a product of New England's defense doing a great job and the defensive coaching staff for the New England Patriots out-coaching the offensive coaching staff for the Cincinnati Bengals, getting into the right looks at the right times to take away anything that's more than 5 yards downfield. The Bengals attempted very few passes more than 5 yards downfield. A couple of deep balls led to productive plays for the Bengals, a 20-yard DPI, a 25-plus yard catch to Jamar Chase in the middle of the field. But they're not really pushing the ball downfield in this game, despite, according to Next Gen Stats, the third lowest pressure rate that Joe Burrow faced in his career. And it's not all Joe Burrow's fault. It's not all the coaching staff's fault. They had a fumble going into the end zone. They had a fumble after a stop to start the second half on the punt that gives up 3 points, that takes 7 points off the board. And so they had awful turnovers, two of the worst turnovers you can have. And I don't think that's hyperbole. I think that the fumble going into the end zone is up there, and fumbling punts. Those are two of the worst turnovers I think you can have in terms of EPA and win probability and all those fun advanced stats. And they had both of them in this game to go along with major tackling issues in the run game. And the Patriots were going to run the ball in this game. We knew that the Bengals interior defensive line could be an issue, but I don't think that I anticipated the Bengals missing 14 tackles, according to initial PFF charting.
Yeah,
and
that's rough.
The eyeball test will tell you that too. The DBs had numerous attempts to get Ramondre Stevenson down in the backfield or at the line of scrimmage, and they just missed too often that led to big runs in big moments. And when you combine that with the turnover on downs and a couple of fumbles and a dropped interception and a this and a that, well, that's where you get the biggest upset you could imagine in week 1.
When you have a quarterback as good as Joe Burrow, these are just not the kind of games you expect, not just him to have, but the team to have. He's the kind of quarterback, at least the way that we talk about Joe Burrow, that just by sheer force of will and talent, he scores more than 10 points at home in a game like this against what we assume is going to be a mediocre at best opponent. They had one of the lowest win totals projected coming in, according to our friends at FanDuel. So at least the betting public thinks that this Patriots team is pretty bad. That's what makes this so surprising, is quarterbacks this good don't usually have games where they look this bad or the offense looks this bad against a team that we also think is this bad.
Yeah, it's the gulf between expectations and reality that's so wide here that makes it hard to really fathom a worse loss for this team. Like, they've had some bad losses in recent years. The opener to Cleveland last year, or whenever they played Cleveland when Joe Burrow couldn't move. But they've had excuses for those in years past. And I guess there are excuses this year if you really want to stretch and find them. T. Higgins didn't play. Jamar Chase didn't practice all preseason, but Joe Burrow did. And that was supposed to be the solve That was supposed to be the cure. They didn't have him last preseason, last training camp when he was dealing with the calf. He had appendicitis the year before, and he missed a good chunk of training camp. This year, he practiced in training camp, and he said that he feels good enough with the wrist and coming off the wrist, but maybe it's just not where it needs to be. That's highly speculative. Again, haven't seen the film yet. Could just be a rust thing, should have played more in the preseason thing. He got one drive. He wanted more. Zach Taylor decided that wasn't the direction they were going to go with the work he got in joint practices with two different teams this preseason. Or is it just this team, this coaching staff, the quarterback, the players, whatever, wherever you want to point the finger, can't figure out how to get a fast start in a season? And this was a year where the schedule was so favorable early in the season, outside of a week 2 visit to Kansas City and Arrowhead. They've got New England, they've got Carolina, they've got Washington in the first 4 weeks. This New England game is one of their last place schedule games and was one of the reasons where you could be bullish on a worst to first Cincinnati Bengals prediction, but they didn't start fast. And so that narrative lingers. And the question as to why lingers, is it playing in the preseason? Is it that the coaching staff takes too long to adapt and find answers? Is it the quarterback? Is it this? Is it that? We don't have that answer yet, and we can continue to speculate about it. But the fact is that they continue to get off to slow starts, setting early drives on fire in this game, emblematic of them setting early games on fire in the last few seasons. And if they're going to be the team that they want to be and that preseason expectations had of them, they cannot do this. And they've got an uphill battle here to get off the schneid against the Chiefs in week 2.
Stay up to date on the Cincinnati Bengals all year long by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Bengals on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. The Lions eked out a close win in overtime over the Rams. Before we get to that, Will Levis squandered a week 1 win for the Titans. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. For that $5 bet, you might want to take a look at Monday Night Football. The San Francisco 49ers are favored to beat Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets. FanDuel has the Niners as 3.5-point favorites. Also, Brock Purdy expected to outpass Rodgers. FanDuel has Purdy's passing yard total set at 240.5, Rodgers at 235.5. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tennessee Titans jumped out to a big lead on Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears and then lost.
There's no time to talk about what can be or how this is just week 1. There is no other way to slice it. That was a terrible game from Will Levis. An awful game from Will Levis. Was the offensive line great? No, they absolutely weren't. But it was Will Levis's mind-numbing decisions that ultimately cost the Tennessee Titans. 19 for 32, 127 yards, didn't go over 100 yards until felt like late into the third quarter, had the touchdown, which the touchdown was pretty lucky. He was under pressure and just tossed it up to Chikakonkwo, and Chikakonkwo made an incredible play on that ball. That was pretty lucky for Will Levis. So, even the touchdown throw was pretty lucky. He missed a couple of throws to Calvin Ridley that were open. Also throws the 2 interception and the pick 6.
Meanwhile, the Saints offense was clicking on all cylinders as they destroyed the Carolina Panthers.
What the New Orleans Saints did on their own accord that had nothing to do with Carolina is the thing that makes me feel so good about what we saw today. I'm going to break down some of those things here in a little bit, but I want to be clear. I'm not detracting from the New Orleans Saints' success today. I'm not going to do it. I will caveat that Carolina is Carolina, and we all know what that means. And the New Orleans Saints did something similar here this year up against the New England Patriots last year, but I'm going to tell you why that's not a big deal to me. What I want to start with, though, is Clint Kubiak, the New Orleans Saints offense, and Derek Carr. Clint Kubiak brought in this new offensive system. And one of the big question marks that we asked was, will they be ready? Like, will they be able to hit the ground running with their new offensive system week one? It was one of the reasons why I was low on the Saints coming into the season, is because I wasn't sure they were going to be able to, based on last year, pick up the new system as quickly as they needed to in order to be a 10-win team like they have the talent to be. Well, here today, they shut me up. And I'm so grateful that they did.
And the Seahawks took care of business against the Broncos.
The difference between the offense in particular, the defense really didn't change much from first to second half, but the offense, just a completely different performance. They couldn't do anything. The offensive line collapsing almost right after the snap, particularly at the guard positions. And also once Stone Forsythe came into the game, that wasn't pretty either. But the adjustments were made in the second half. You got to give credit to Ryan Grubb in particular, just because, and the players did after the game, Corbin, give credit to Ryan Grubb, Kenneth Walker in particular, stating that his offensive coordinator made the necessary adjustments at halftime in order to change this thing around. And it was night and day, really, especially when you look at Kenneth Walker. Whenever I was watching the game, it was just like, okay, Kenneth Walker is taking over right now. This is not, and it was partially because of what Grubb was scheming up. I know you've already dove into it, Corbin, just on the double trap on the touchdown that you were talking about. I know you were all juiced up about that one, as was I. Just to see two guards pulling on opposite sides of the line, it's beautiful.
Matthew Stafford in revenge game appearances in the last calendar year, 0 for 2. Although this one in week one took free football. It was a weird game, but a fun game. 26-20, the Lions win in overtime. Matt Derry from Locked On Lions joins me now. And Matt, we saw Jameson Williams do what the Detroit Lions thought he could do when they drafted him. They moved up to draft him in the first round a couple years ago. But the offense didn't quite look how we expected it to look. How did the Lions get this one done?
You know, Pete, this was not a vintage Lions performance, at least vintage from the last couple of years. They had to eke this one out. It's almost like they went up 17-3 and figured, all right, we're good to go here. The Rams are banged up on their offensive line. We'll just pin our ears back and call it a night. And that did not happen. There were some players on the Lions defense that completely no-showed. Brian Branch was terrible. Aleem McNeil, never heard his name. They continue to not get enough pressure opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. Hutchinson was fantastic, but the rest of the guys were questionable. And the play calling, I thought, was a little suspect. Then they get to overtime, Pete, and it's Lions ground and pound and grit and grime, and just pounding the Rams into submission until David Montgomery walked it off. So where was that? Where was that at the start of the second half? And but the Lions will tell you they might have stole one tonight, but they're 1-0, and I'm sure they'll feel better about, you know, going into the Tampa game next week, fixing some of their mistakes.
Why do you think we didn't see Sam Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown in the same way that we're used to seeing them? Amon-Ra St. Brown, 3 catches for 13 yards in this one, despite 6 targets. It was just not the balanced, they can get anything from anywhere version of the Lions offense we saw last year.
Yeah, this was a Lions offense a year ago that averaged close to 400 yards a game. They were nowhere near that on Sunday night. St. Brown was completely taken away by the Rams, but I also thought Jared Goff was looking more for Jameson Williams on Sunday night than he was for Amon-Ra. That will be corrected for sure. I also think they just, you know, there were times last year where this sort of happened in the first half, and then, you know, Ben Johnson would give him the ball, St. Brown on a jet sweep or something. And that just didn't happen tonight. But I think overall, the Lions still have to feel good about getting out of there with a win. McVay and Stafford are a magical duo for sure, and Lions escape.
They escaped in the playoff as well. That was a 1-point game and a thriller in the postseason as well for the Detroit Lions. Did you see defensively some of the changes that you expected? Terrion Arnold coming in, the first-round pick, Carlton Davis, who they traded for. You mentioned Brian Branch did not play his best game, but this is a reworked secondary here. And while Matthew Stafford, he's going to get his yards, only 20 points on the board.
Yeah, I thought the secondary was better. That cornerback room is much deeper. You saw when Arnold went out, Ennis Rakestraw, the rookie, came in and made a couple of plays. It's definitely better. Carlton Davis knocking the ball away from Kupp on that fourth down. There were some plays that were made. I thought Terrion Arnold got a bad whistle tonight. But again, he's going to have to learn. You can't be so grabby and so physical at this level.
College is a different game.
It is. But I think you definitely saw some improvement. But Pete, that new secondary, it can be fresh and all these new guys and everything else. But you got to get pressure on the quarterback. And outside of 97, there was not a lot of guys getting some heat on Stafford. He had too much time outside of Aiden Hutchinson getting to him tonight.
Yeah, first drive, Matt. Alex Anzalone made 2 of the first 3 plays of the game for the Detroit Lions. He is someone who played some really good football last year and was someone that was not seen as a huge addition when the Lions brought him in 2021. But the last 2 seasons, he's been a really solid football player. What has changed for him in Detroit?
He has a lot of confidence from the coaching staff. He obviously has familiarity with Dan Campbell from New Orleans when Campbell was an assistant head coach down there, and also Aaron Glenn, who was the secondary coach down there. So I think those guys have given him a lot of confidence, and plays with, like, you're right, like a chicken with their head cut off. He's out there on fire. He's really been kind of a leader and a guy that wears the C. And no, nobody expected this. I think he signed a 1-year deal originally and then obviously got more years, but he's been really good. Like you said, kind of set the tone tonight. I thought the defense at times did their thing. Other times, like we talked about, a little bit leaky. But again, Pete, and I know you've talked about this on your podcast, Talking Packers, not playing your starters in the preseason. I thought the Lions looked rusty at times tonight. I did.
Stay up to date all year on the Detroit Lions by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Lions on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, the Steelers defense began the season in an elite way. The Pittsburgh Steelers had some drama with Russell Wilson scratched for a calf injury, but with a defense like that, the Atlanta Falcons had no shot.
The Pittsburgh Steelers go into Atlanta and get the dub 18-10 over the Atlanta Falcons, starting the season 1-0. And boy, was that old school Steelers football very much how they've had to win the past several seasons. I guess 3. That's not several. You get my point. But bottom line, Steelers had the script, stuck to the script, got it done. I'm going to get to Justin Fields and the offense in a minute here because that is a big part of this. But I think the story that shows the potential of this team that comes out of this game is, boy, did that defense look good. I know there were some times you're a little nervous. There were a couple runs, like the 13-yard run by Algier and the 13-yard run by Bijan Robinson. You're a little nervous, but by and large, they shut it down in this game. Held Bijan Robinson to under 4 yards per carry, 18 carries for 68 yards. Like I said, I told you all week long, their history with Kirk Cousins, they get 2 interceptions. The key is, will they be able to stuff the run outside of those 2 interceptions? They did, and Kirk Cousins threw those 2 interceptions. TJ Watt had a fumble recovery. Should have had 2 with a strip sack. We'll get to those penalties in a little bit. But by and large, this defense was a difference maker. And I haven't even had the chance to go over the all-22 yet, so I could assess just how important so many different levels of the defense were. There were, I think, just from first glance of watching on television, I could see differences made by Minkah Fitzpatrick because he was allowed to roam and do so much more things. Like there were the play where he stuffed Bijan Robinson just in front of the line of scrimmage. Looked really impressive with how far deep he was able to come from. The things Alex Highsmith could do, things Cam Hayward could do. By the way, they were both playmakers in this game. Deshaun Elliott's interception, but also Joey Porter Jr., at least from what I was able to see, I still haven't seen the all-22. I thought he did a really good job in coverage. Looked like he wasn't a liability. The Steelers at large, I think they more than controlled the tempo of this game on defense, held the Falcons to 2 of 9 on third downs. And again, that's with a veteran quarterback, and that's with all these playmakers that were supposed to make the Steelers basically, shaking their boots this week. Bijan Robinson, limited him all game. He did get over 100 yards from scrimmage, but 5 catches for 43 yards, 18 carries for 68 yards. You could take that. Kyle Pitts, 3 catches, 26 yards, did have a touchdown, but by and large, nothing big there. Drake London, the major receiver they were supposed to worry about, 2 catches, 15 yards, 3 targets, no problem. Overall, you allow 155 yards through the air. You get 3 turnovers in this game. The defense more than did its job to win this game. And I really think that, again, it's the composition of the defense that makes the world a difference here for the Steelers. It's the fact that their D-line does have a rotation to it. They have the edge rushers. And look at the end of this game, because I do think, and we're going to touch a little bit on the offense and how it plays into the defense, you saw how fresh TJ Watt looked at the end of the game. You don't see that too often with the Steelers. At the end of the game, TJ Watt over the past several years, a few years, has been tired at games because he's been out there a lot because the Steelers were losing the time of possession battle. But what happened in this game? The Steelers dominated time of possession. They had the ball for 35 minutes and 36 seconds compared to the Falcons' 24 minutes and 24 seconds. That's over 11 minutes of having the ball more than the other team. It allowed the Steelers to keep the Falcons in check. And again, we're going to get to the offense in a bit, but I think a big part of that was the fact that the Steelers in general were pretty decent on third downs. They didn't score a touchdown, and that's bad. And we'll talk about why I think that was. But them extending drives was huge in this game. The fact that they were able to only have 1 3-and-out the entire game. Actually 2 3-and-outs. I take that back. They had 2 3-and-outs this entire game compared to where last year they 3-and-outs were like coming. You were lucky if you had 2 3-and-outs in a quarter.
And finally, Philadelphia Eagles beat writers got creative for the first Friday game in Sao Paulo. X, formerly known as Twitter, is banned from Brazil. So a handful of beat writers had their wives run their accounts from back in the States. I'm talking about text this as a tweet, and then they tweeted. Seriously, a beat writer's wife actually sent a preface tweet as the game got going to let everyone know of her guest contributions that night. Spouses sign up for a lot in this business. I'm sure they never thought they would have to do that, but it's awesome that they did. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, will Aaron Rodgers get to play an entire game this year? So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.